Welcome back to the book log once again. Today I'm going to be talking about Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. There will be spoilers in this review. There are a lot of different types of sci-fi out there, and I feel like Andy Weir has really etched out his own specific brand of it. He's not really writing philosophical sci-fi that's trying to make some deeper point. I suppose you could say he does speculative sci-fi, but that doesn't really feel right either, because for the most part he's using an approximation of existing technology, or at least technology that is feasibly within reach right now. He's not speculating very much on anything. If anything, he's more like a rationalist engineering fiction writer or something. A lot of people just say hard sci-fi, so I guess we just go with that. He uses real physics, real chemistry, real engineering, or at least as close as he can sensibly achieve to those things, in order to write science thrillers that primarily take place in outer space somewhere. I did read The Martian a couple years ago, and I enjoyed it quite a bit because I thought it was a successful execution of a very solid premise. What if an astronaut got stranded on Mars? How could someone survive that, and what would be the technical considerations of surviving something like that? Andy Weir is not afraid to get deep into the minutiae of physics and chemistry and math to explain the specific ways someone might overcome various different obstacles through science, and he's able to explain these things while still maintaining a pretty entertaining and effective story. There were aspects to The Martian that I found to be somewhat agitating. I thought it had a kind of annoying protagonist with a bit of a cloying sense of humor, and I thought there were a lot of plot contrivances that were a bit hard to ignore, just like a constant string of things going wrong, only for the perfect solution to immediately reveal itself. Project Hail Mary is a very similar book in both its tone and in the way it's constructed as a story, but I think it's an improvement over The Martian in almost every conceivable way. The cloying humor and plot contrivances are still present, but they are dialed down a lot, and on top of that, I think the story itself is far more thrilling, more entertaining, more creative, and way more ambitious. I think Andy Weir did a great job of playing to his strengths in this book. He really swung for the fences, and as a result, I think he created a truly fantastic piece of science fiction. Like The Martian, Project Hail Mary has a great and immediately gripping hook. This time it's about a man named Ryland Grace who wakes up from a coma on a spaceship somewhere out in space with absolutely no recollection of who he is or what he's doing there. There are two dead astronauts on board with him, and as he starts exploring the ship, he slowly comes to remember that he is a school teacher and former microbiologist who has been somehow placed on this mission to save humanity from an impending apocalypse due to the sun rapidly losing power. The fact that Grace can't remember anything at first is a pretty clever plot device because it allows Andy Weir to slowly feed us exposition and feed us information about what is happening through intermittent flashbacks that Grace will randomly get as he regains his memory. I think this is really great for the pacing of the story. It allows for the right things to be revealed at the right times. It feels a lot like a mystery story, especially in the beginning, because we don't know any of the details about Grace or this mission or what's happening to the sun. Fortunately, Andy Weir is able to pull off the rather impressive feat of answering all of these questions in a way that is actually satisfying and interesting. Again, the way this book is structured has the past timeline of Ryland Grace before the space mission and the present timeline of Ryland Grace during the space mission happening concurrently through the use of this flashback device. But I'm going to lay out the background here because it's kind of foundational to the actual science in this book. So like I said, scientists noticed one day that the sun is getting dimmer, which coincides with the formation of a bright infrared line between the sun and Venus, which is dubbed the Petrova line. They estimate that this dimming will cause catastrophic climate disasters within about 30 years, so the world governments put their heads together for a solution, another recurring theme from The Martian. They appoint Eva Stratt as the leader, a woman who used to work for the European Space Agency, and they essentially give her complete unmitigated authority to do anything in the world at any cost to solve this problem as quickly as possible, which honestly did come across as a bit ridiculous at points, but I'll let it slide given the circumstances. It's discovered that the Petrova line is made up of alien microbes that are absorbing the sun's energy, which explains the dimming as well as the red line in space. Stratt appoints our main character, Ryland Grace, to study these organisms due to his experience in microbiology, and he figures out how they work in a lot more detail. He learns that they consume electromagnetic radiation, and he names them astrophage, which is how they're referred to for the rest of the book. He also discovers that they breed by absorbing energy from the sun and carbon dioxide from Venus, which is why it's there in the first place. Astrophage ends up being a bit of a double-edged sword because even though it's killing the sun, it also ends up being the most energy-efficient fuel ever created by far and pretty much instantly solves all energy limitations on Earth and enables interstellar travel for humans. This is convenient because another thing scientists have noticed is that astrophage has also infected and dimmed a whole bunch of other nearby stars except for one, which is called Tau Ceti. So that's the birth of the Project Hail Mary mission. That's what it is. A bunch of rocket scientists and engineers design astrophage rocket fuel, and a mission is created to send a ship of astronauts to Tau Ceti to figure out why it is seemingly immune to this calamity. There are a lot of interesting astronaut and science expert characters introduced here. Some of them seemed a bit cartoonish to actually be legitimately serious professionals on a mission to save the planet, especially Dubois and Ilyukina, but again, that just kind of comes with the territory for this book's sense of humor. Grace helps to train these astronauts for the mission, but there's a last-second accident which kills a couple of them, and Grace is essentially forced at gunpoint to join the mission in their place. There's a whole thing about how he has an incredibly rare gene which allows for long-term comas for space travel, so there aren't a lot of alternative options. Grace vehemently did not want to go, and so was deliberately sedated and given an amnesia-inducing drug before launch, which is why he can't remember anything. This aspect is revealed pretty late into the story, and I think it gives his character an interesting dynamic. He wasn't some selfless altruist who wanted to save the world. He was kind of a coward who was forced into this heroic position against his will, but is nonetheless trying to make the most of it. The present timeline, the one where Grace is stranded in space, is definitely where this book shines for me and where it went furthest into directions I wasn't anticipating. Shortly after the Hail Mary spaceship reaches the Tau Ceti star system, it is approached by an alien spaceship. They end up exchanging some rudimentary communication back and forth. The spaceship sends over a sort of 3D star map that indicates they are from the 40 Eridani star system, which is a real-life star system with, like, actually discovered exoplanets, by the way. And eventually they decide to dock ships together, where Grace meets the other main character in this book, Rocky, who is an eyeless, dog-sized, five-legged, spider-like Iridian alien who seems to be made of some kind of rock, hence the name Grace calls him. I absolutely love this whole component of the story. It really took me by surprise. I was not expecting it to go so explicitly into this first contact direction, but I'm really glad it did because Rocky is a phenomenal addition to the story. A lot of the book is about them figuring out how to communicate with each other and eventually learn how to collaborate with each other, because it turns out that Rocky's home star is also infected with astrophage, and he's there for the same reason we are. Andy Weir makes a lot of really interesting decisions in regards to how Rocky's species works, from their language to their biology to their planet. For instance, they communicate through tones, like musical notes, essentially. Grace and Rocky aren't physically capable of producing one another's sounds, but they eventually figure out how to catalog words and can understand each other's spoken language, which, as a linguistics nerd, I actually found to be pretty silly and unrealistic, but I'll let it slide for the purposes of making a propulsive plot. Rocky's home planet has such a thick atmosphere that light doesn't reach the surface. As a result, Iridians didn't evolve eyes or any mechanism to detect light. They see through a sort of hyper-advanced echolocation. Their food is full of toxic metals, and they eat by dropping it into a big gape in their carapace. Their planet has incredibly high temperatures and incredibly high pressure compared to Earth, and also their atmosphere is full of ammonia, so neither one of them can survive in each other's world, which of course Andy Weir has to account for through all sorts of engineering logistics on the two spaceships. One thing I thought was very unique about this dynamic is that humans are actually a lot more advanced than Iridians. Rocky is completely mesmerized by computers. Grace had to teach him about radiation, which is how the rest of Rocky's crew died. He also had to teach him about relativity. Due to the way their species evolved, they never had to travel through space before their planet was facing this apocalyptic scenario, so humans actually end up being the hyper-advanced, high-tech species between the two. But on the other hand, Iridians seem to be generally smarter than humans. They can hold more information in their brain, they can do math quicker. Rocky is a way better engineer than Grace. They have this substance called xenonite, which is a solid form of xenon and is incredibly durable. Also, they live like 10 times longer than humans. Throughout this book, Grace and Rocky develop such a strong friendship in the face of their shared apocalypse situation, and it's so beautifully rendered. Even though these two creatures are so different in so many different ways, they are still both sentient beings who just want to survive and want to prolong the survival of their species. It's even alluded to a few times that humans and Iridians likely share a common ancestor. Their relationship is definitely the highlight of the book to me. A lot of it reads more or less like a buddy comedy, but Andy Weir is able to inject so much heart into it. I thought it was executed wonderfully. So the crux of the rest of the story is them trying to figure out why Tau Ceti is not getting dimmer like the rest of these stars, and the answer ends up being another type of microorganism, which Grace dubs Taumoeba, like a mixture of Tau Ceti and amoeba. Taumoeba are essentially the natural predator to astrophage. They consume it to survive, and so this whole star system is like a literal ecosystem. The astrophage reproduce, and the Taumoeba eat them. It's a nice and convenient solution, but of course there has to be a bunch of catastrophes Grace and Rocky have to overcome. First, they have to breed the Taumoeba so it can survive in nitrogen atmospheres like Earth and Arid, and then they have to figure out how to keep it on the ship without it annihilating all of their fuel, which, reminder, is made entirely of astrophage. Grace and Rocky eventually part ways. Grace is even able to make it home in the first place, rather than the originally intended suicide mission, because Rocky gave him a bunch of extra fuel. But shortly after they depart, Grace learns that Taumoeba can eat through xenonite, which is what Rocky's entire ship is made of. So the climactic finale is Grace having to choose between rescuing his friend Rocky or saving his own life and continuing on towards Earth. He can already remotely send the info and Taumoeba back to Earth either way, so the decision is really about him sacrificing his own life or not. And this guy, who originally had to literally be forced onto this mission, ends up making the self-sacrifice and turning his ship around to get Rocky home safely before it's too late. I thought it was a really beautiful ending. In both of his books that I've read, you can tell that Andy Weir has an almost radically optimistic view towards humanity and our willingness to generally do the right thing, do the noble thing when push comes to shove. True or not, it's enjoyable to read about sometimes, and there's a really neat coda to this book where Grace actually ends up making it back to Arid and living out his days in a big dome on their planet like a famous alien ambassador from Earth, where he gets to continue being a school teacher but to little spider alien children instead of humans, which I thought was a cute touch. So yeah, I definitely went through the plot in more meticulous detail than I usually would for this type of review, but I just found there to be so many cool and interesting ideas in this book, and I felt compelled to mention as many of them as possible. Again, I don't think this is a perfect book. I think there are moments where it's a bit overly glib or too quippy and self-aware for its own good, but that's just how Andy Weir writes, it seems. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He's not afraid to let his own personality and sensibilities drift into the writing, which is probably true of everyone to some degree or another. And in spite of that, I think this is one of the funnest sci-fi stories I've read. I appreciate its dedication to both being plausibly realistic and well-researched in the science, and also being really audacious and daring and imaginative. It's hard to do both at once, and this book nails it. It walks the line perfectly, I thought. It's already such a popular book, and it already has such a beloved reputation, and I think that's deserved. This will probably go down as a classic science fiction book that people will be reading for a long time. I would give this book a strong 8.